Okay. So, I think that I have now figured out what this game is about. I was thinking about it a little bit last night, and I think I came up with a pretty cool idea. I just want to make this video sort of showcase what we're going to be working towards. And now, there's still a lot of things up in the air, but I think this is a much better direction and clearer direction than I had before. And doing a little preview of some of the technology that we will be using to go ahead and make this game now that I know sort of how it works. So the idea is that you are a little cursor, just like we have in our text editor right here. So you can move it with the arrow keys. Maybe you can like click to place it around on things. I don't know. Um, kind of however you want to move it. And then when when you type something, we go ahead and move the cursor, right? Um, and you will type out a word, right? Or maybe even multiple words, right? Maybe it'll be like attack fast or something like that. So rather than having our input down here, right, where we just type attack like that, we'll go ahead and actually put it inside the world, right? So as you're moving around this world, you are going to be typing things and actually injecting those words into the world. Then what we will do is when when you type a word and you hit enter, we go ahead and we have the computer parse it and try to read it like a sentence, right? So if we're like standing next to the wolf, right? So if I go, let's do this. I go like that, right? And then I type. Well, I guess I would need to move uh, more to the right. I guess it won't work in the game as it is right now. But let's just say I'm standing right here, and then the wolf is over here, right? Well, I would type attack, and then hit enter, and then the program would go ahead and parse that, and it would go ahead and look at that and see like, hey, the player verb an object, right? The player attacked the wolf, and it could also go ahead and understand something like wolf attacks player, right? So what it would be doing is reading English sentences and then converting those into game code, essentially, right? State changes in the world. So if wolf attacks player, then it would look like that. If wolf attacks player, we would need to know, hey, the player has been attacked by the wolf, right? And that's pretty cool because that is essentially the same way that our compiler translates our C language into machine code. Here, what we'll be doing is translating English sentences into game code or game effects, right? So, you could imagine what would happen here is we would translate this into like creature, verb, player, right? Something like that. Or maybe it would even be like object, verb, player, right? And that could even be something like object, verb, object, right? And then we would go ahead and look up to see, hey, what object did the thing? What object was affected by the thing? What does the effect of the verb have on the object, right? So I think that could be really cool, very interesting game space, something I would like to play around with. I think it would be cool to see someone design a game like this. Now, of course, you can go ahead and work on any games that you want. You can go ahead and take the lessons that you've learned here and apply that anywhere. But this will give you a good idea of how someone goes about making a game from start to finish, right? Which is a really valuable thing to see that I wish I had had access to when I had first started out. So when we do parsing, we can learn sort of how the compiler works. Um, but right now, with the way that our game works, I don't really think that we have a good interface for doing this, right? Because you see that every time I do something, it's always going to be typed down here. And that gets kind of weird because then there's not like this very clear sense that, hey, when I'm typing, I'm like adding words into the world. Now, maybe we could do a thing after I type attack, we wind up drawing the screen again with, the word attack right next to the player. But I don't know. I feel like that isn't going to look very good. It might be hard for us to reason about and think about what's going on. Like, one of the things I think would be interesting for this game is if we have something like if we have the player right here and the wolf right here, well, the player wouldn't be able to attack because they're too far away from the wolf, right? So we would need to have the player move over to the left so that they have enough space to type the word attack. So it kind of becomes like a puzzle game in a way, and we actually care about the positioning of the player. So that could be kind of part of the skill of the game, is you want to move your player around the world so that you have a good space, a good place to type whatever it is that you want to, right? So I think that could lead to some really interesting gameplay. With the way it works right now, though, we aren't able to do that just because we are using the terminal in Linux to do this. So our game wouldn't work on Windows, it wouldn't work on a OS X or anything like that. So I would like to go ahead and change that. And I know you had mentioned in an email that was something you were interested in, how to like open windows and move the mouse around and draw things on the screen. And while we are technically drawing things on the screen right here, there's a lot that's sort of hidden from us about how that works. Like, we don't really have a way to change the color of letters in our code. We don't really have a nice way to change the size of things, right? We could like make the board more or fewer characters wide or tall, but we can't change the size of letters, right? So I think what I would like to do going forward is start showing off how we interface with the operating system, which we are kind of doing now, but not in a very low-level or powerful way, right? It's just sort of happening automatically by using the C language. But by interfacing with the operating system, we're going to be able to do things like open windows, draw to that window, play sound files, things like that. And we can just get a lot more power and flexibility over how we make our game, right? So even though we would be turn-based, we don't necessarily have to render the game turn-based, right? Like, one really annoying thing about our game is that you always have to press enter when you do a thing, right? You have to press S, enter to move, right? Well, we won't have to do it that way when we're in control of how we do input, right? So I think that is going to be a very cool way forward with the project. And, I know it might seem like we got sort of distracted here. Like, we wound up making a game, or we started making a game using the terminal, and then we decided, well, you know what, forget it. We aren't going to use the terminal. But I would argue that that isn't actually a very bad way to go about it. We started doing things in the simplest, most straightforward way that we knew how. Like, we knew if you're making a 3D game, if you're making Quake 4, you know that you aren't going to use the terminal to make it, right? You know you're going to start by opening a window and drawing things in 3 dimensions, right? But since we're making a game that uses a lot of text, we didn't really know ahead of time the best way to go about doing that. So we just started very simply. We're like, hey, we can open a terminal, we can start drawing things, we can start moving around and start thinking about how this game would work, right? And now that we've gotten a little further, we know, hey, we want to do a thing that's actually more complicated than what we can do with our current system. So let's go ahead and go off and start working on that more complicated system. And then we can, get back to sort of making our game and experimenting with it. But we can do some some architecture changes to how the code works. So I hope you're excited about this. I'm very excited about it. Like I said, if you want to go ahead and keep playing around with making terminal games like this, if you have an idea for a terminal game that would work really well and doesn't need anything fancy like what I'm talking about doing right now, that's great. You should go ahead and play around with it. Send it to me. I'd love to play it. But yeah, we can start doing this and get into some really cool ideas that I had sort of thought we would save until the second semester. But I think we're kind of at a point right now. If you followed the last 4 or 5 videos reasonably well and you have an idea of what's going on, then I think we are definitely ready to start interfacing with the operating system and doing more complicated things.